Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you so kindly for joining us. Welcome to Green Apple Books on the Park. My name is Gianna. Thanks for giving it up for Green Apple. I like this place too. Welcome to Green Apple Books on the Park. My name is Car Johnson. I'm the event coordinator for Green Apple. And tonight I am very happy to welcome Gianna Toboni as we celebrate the release of her book, The Volunteer, The Failure of the Death Penalty in America and One Inmate's Quest to Die with Dignity. Let's give a hand for Gianna. I love it. I love to see it. Thank you all so much. You could be anywhere on a Friday, and I'm so glad that you're here with us tonight. Gianna is joined tonight by fellow reporter and author of The Lost and the Found, Kevin Fagan. Let's give a hand for Kevin. We have a really dynamite pair here this evening. I was telling Kevin earlier that I love when journalists talk to one another because they're professional question askers, so we really benefit from their conversation. I'm really glad for it. Thank you for joining us here in person and also online. Hello, online audience. I'm waving to a camera if you cannot see. We are broadcasting from San Francisco. We open each of our events with a land acknowledgement, and so now I would like to let you know that we are operating on unceded Ramaytush Ohlone land. We think at Green Apple that acknowledgement requires action, and so we encourage you to donate either your time or monetary means to an Indigenous organization each time you hear a land acknowledgement. We have details about the Ramaytush Ohlone Land Trust at the back desk if you are interested in how to participate in this project of rematriation. I have very brief business before I let these two take over. Now is a good time to silence your cell phones if you have not already. I didn't ask, how do we feel about picture taking? Picture taking is good, it is encouraged, but no bad pictures, that's not allowed. Only flattering pictures of our authors, please. Just don't take a call in the middle of the event, that's the purpose of that, thank you. Please do check out our full event calendar online at greenapplebooks.com. We have a really great season ahead of us, including the event you are currently attending. Please do buy books if you are able. We always appreciate it. If you've been here before, you've certainly heard me say that when you buy books from us, not only do you support us as an independent bookstore, you support the writers who put so much work into making these books, and then you get to have a book, which might be the best part. So if you are able, we always appreciate it. And while I have you, and because we are here, I really appreciate you showing up, not just for Gianna. I think a lot of you already know Gianna and like her, so you're showing up. But I imagine that you're also here because you care about the prison industrial complex and how we treat incarcerated people. And because of that, I'd like to take a brief moment to plug the Prisoners Literature Project. They are a Berkeley-based nonprofit that has been sending highly requested books to incarcerated readers for almost 40 years. They're one of our big community partners, and we love the work that they do. And we have a very streamlined way to support their work if you are interested. We have a display across from the front register. You will see it. There's a sign that says Prisoners Literature Project. And we have several books that are highly requested from readers on the inside. What you do is you purchase a copy of one of those books on display, you bring it to the register, you say, I would like to donate this to the PLP. We put it in our box that we send to them, and it goes to someone who requested that book. It's very simple. If you are interested, it's directly across from the register. If you need to know where it is, someone will gladly point it out to you. But they do amazing work and have been doing it for a long time, so I just thought it would be relevant for the evening to let you know that that is something you can do. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the two writers who are joining us tonight. First, Kevin Fagan is a longtime award-winning reporter, having spent over 3 decades at the San Francisco Chronicle. He won the Bill Workman Award from the San Francisco Press Club, the James Aronson Award for Social Justice and Journalism, and the John S. Knight Journalism Fellowship at Stanford University. He has also been nominated several times for the Pulitzer Prize. He is the author of the new book, The Lost and the Found, a true story of homelessness, found family, and second chances. Let's give one more hand for Kevin Fagan. And last but most certainly not least, Gianna Toboni is an Emmy Award-winning documentary filmmaker and journalist. Formerly a senior correspondent and producer for Vice News, she received a GLAAD Media Award for her coverage of the battle between religious and LGBTQ rights in America, a Webby Award for Best Documentary Series, and was recognized by the Newswomen's Club of New York at the Front Page Awards for her reporting on transgender youth. Toboni was named to Forbes 30 Under 30 list for media, is a TEDx speaker and a Peabody finalist, and The Volunteer is her first book and the reason we are here tonight. Let's give one more hand to Gianna.
Well, let me just say real quick, this woman's book is awesome. I've covered a lot of death penalty stuff myself over the years. I've never seen anything quite like this. And I'm not going to waste a whole lot of time. She has something to
I'll just jump in very quickly, and then I'll hand the reins over. Kevin, as you all know, is a legendary San Francisco reporter. He's been an inspiration to me personally. He may mention this, but has witnessed several executions. He's covered the highest profile crime cases in the Bay Area, so we're lucky to have him here. Thank you all for being here. I'm very humbled to see all of you in the audience here. Writing a book is very hard. It's easily the hardest professional endeavor that I've taken on. And it's not the writing, it's everything else, at least in my case. It's the reporting, it's the Freedom of Information Act requests, it's taking on a state in a prison who doesn't want me reporting on it. It's trying to get their emails and their text messages and all of that. And it's also a lonely process. I'm usually, on the road with the whole crew, and instead I'm, in my sort of garage office, beautiful garage office built by Joey. But on the phone, and sometimes I wonder, I have all these weird experiences of meeting these characters, and I feel like I live two lives, one with all of you, and then one that is in the pages of these books, or this book. And so I'll be very interested to hear all of your thoughts. I just wanted to mention one other thing, which is that you'll notice on the first page, this book is dedicated to my family, which is about 90% of this room. And specifically my immediate family. And I just wanted to say, my parents, I would guess that it's no parent's dream to have their daughter, interviewing death row inmates and terrorists and cartel members. So thank you for your patience and your unwavering support over the years. And to Kyle, my partner, the greatest partner in the world, I wouldn't be able to do this work without him. And usually me going on shoots and pursuing these stories means, solo parenting and Kyle putting his work second. So I'm forever grateful. Kyle, thank you. Okay, Kevin, enough of this sappy stuff. Let's get to it. I think I'm just going to start by reading the prologue, and then we can dive in. For folks especially who don't know what this book is about, I'll just spend 2 minutes reading the prologue to get you up to speed, and then we'll dive into some questions here. Just weeks before Scott Dozier's scheduled execution in Ely, Nevada in the fall of 2017, I reached out to him in hopes that he'd be willing to appear in a documentary I was making for HBO. I was interested in Dozier for the way his story could help illuminate what appeared to be a broken system of capital punishment, one that routinely failed to carry out the sentence of death, and when it did, often botched the resulting executions. I had in my years as a reporter and filmmaker interviewed Mexican cartel hitmen, Hamas leaders, and American sex traffickers, individuals who were often as charismatic as their actions were depraved. And so I came to Dozier with no small amount of caution. And yet from the first minute of our first conversation, I was completely captivated by Dozier. His vocabulary was as advanced as his use of profanities. His jokes often revolved around his imminent state-sanctioned murder. His personal relationships with family and friends were genuine, strong, and loving. He wasn't quick to claim his innocence. He was, in almost every respect, a death row inmate who defied my expectations. Dozier was surprising in more than one way. A year later, Dozier had done what few inmates dare to. He asked the state to execute him. I, Scott Raymond Dozier, of sound mind, do hereby request that my death sentence be enacted and I be put to death, he wrote on October 31st, 2016, to the judge presiding over his case. Additionally, I would ask that no motions, complaints, or otherwise countermandering or contrary to the above by anyone other than myself be heard or otherwise entertained by the court. Nevada hadn't killed an inmate since 2006. While prosecutors had continued to seek the death penalty for defendants, there wasn't the political will to actually do the dirty work of executing them. So rather than the sudden death of lethal injection, more than 80 men were dying slowly on death row, the threat of their execution only vaguely hovering over them. That wouldn't work for Dozier. It isn't that I want to die, it's that I'd rather be dead than do this, he told me. More than 20 hours of his day were spent in a small metal cage. For a guy like Dozier, who had boundless energy and who had experienced a thrilling and fast life in his first 30 years, a life on death row wasn't a life worth living. It seems like for you, life in prison is actually worse punishment than the death penalty, I suggested to him in one of our first conversations. Abso-fucking-lutely, without question, he said. He resented the state's failure to carry out the punishment it had handed down. You say you're gonna fucking kill someone, you should fucking kill them. Fucking handle your business. One of his lawyers told me it was unusual, even comical, to watch Dozier call out the government. Here's a man thumbing his nose in the face of the state of Nevada saying, "Go on, come. You've been threatening to take my life, let's see you do it." And they would all just squabble. Now, with his execution finally approaching, Dozier was ready, even relieved it was coming. He gave away his personal belongings to other inmates and prepared goodbyes for his family. Dozier was at peace with his decision. It was as I was preparing to fly to Ely to sit down with Dozier for a final interview that he called me, dejected. My execution was stayed, he told me. I flew to Nevada anyway, hoping I could interview him in person. Prison officials barred me from entering. I would gain access eventually, though not on that day. As I stood before the prison, the cold mountain wind stung my hands. Set in a vast valley surrounded by steep mountains, the drab gray buildings checkered with tiny windows formed a highly secure complex, guarded by watchtowers and barbed wire. I was standing maybe 100 yards from Dozier's cell when my phone rang. It was him. Dozier's voice betrayed frustration and disappointment. He had made peace with having his life end this way. He was ready for the indignity of death row, of the years, and for other inmates, the decades spent in painful limbo, to come to an end. As we talked, I said out loud a thought that had been nagging at me since I was first introduced to his story. It seemed strange to me, I suggested, that the state wanted him executed, and he wanted to be executed, and yet he was still alive. Yeah, it starts to call all sorts of things into question for me, he said. Like, does the state really want me executed, or do they just want to be able to say they execute people, but never really do it? Over the following year, as I immersed myself in the world of capital punishment and got to know Dozier better, I came to see the way his story offered a powerful representation of our nation's broken death penalty system. Nevada's inability to carry out Dozier's execution and that of his fellow death row inmates was an echo of what was taking place all across the United States. As I got to know Dozier, and as I met other incarcerated people, their defenders, and those who would have a hand in their execution, I found a hopelessly entangled system, one whose history in the United States dates back to even before the country's independence. When European settlers landed in America and brought with them capital punishment, the act of killing a citizen was much simpler. It was usually done by a bullet or a rope, though there were instances of boiling and burning and beheading, and it was administered for crimes as simple as stealing grapes or killing chickens. When Virginia, a state with such laws on its books, realized it might not be the best way to attract new residents, it revised its sentencing laws to allay the public's fear, extending capital punishment to only the most severe crimes, a theme present throughout much of the death penalty's history. Methods of execution evolved over the years, comprising electrocution, gassing, and hanging, and they evolved further still when officials realized the public tolerance for outwardly brutal and at times public executions was waning. In 1966, public approval for the death penalty hit an all-time low at 42%. So in the 1970s, states started to experiment with a new method, lethal injection. By selecting a drug or cocktail of drugs and overdosing the condemned, the way a veterinarian might put down a sick animal, they figured they could carry out these executions in a more humane way, or at least one that would appear to be more humane. Lethal injection quickly became the most popular method of execution across America. In my reporting on the death penalty, I discovered that the attempt to make executions more humane may be precisely what has made them less so. Expert witnesses and autopsies revealed startling truths around what inmates might be experiencing mid-execution. The findings were concerning enough that some inmates began opting for methods of old, including those known to be brutal, such as electrocution, over the more common lethal injection. In other words, in turning to what was considered a more humane method, states may have driven inmates to only more wrenching deaths, and along the way, all but lost their ability to carry out capital punishment in America. More recently, states have had to contend with a new threat: drug companies' refusal to allow their products to be purchased for execution. From Pfizer to Sandoz, pharmaceutical companies have gone as far as to sue state governments and, in some cases, renegotiate distribution contracts to ensure their drugs wouldn't be used for this purpose. States have been unfazed by these demands. They've illegally imported drugs from overseas and traded them across state lines. When that didn't work, they brought back those grisly methods of the past. As this circus plays out in media, courtrooms, and capitals, incarcerated folks sit alone in their cells, wondering whether they'll ever face the death chamber. The vast majority of these inmates will not die by execution, though the public will pay as much as 10 times more for their having been handed down that sentence, as opposed to life without parole. Those costs ramp up due to legal appeals specific to capital cases. So much of the debate surrounding the death penalty since the 1960s has centered on its morality, whether it's right for the state to execute certain offenders. Hardliners might argue that by having committed the most heinous crimes imaginable, death row inmates aren't worthy of our understanding. If they suffer unduly, either on death row or by the needle, well, so did their victims. Let me be clear from the outset, this book isn't concerned with relitigating the moral or ethical arguments for or against the death penalty. Because what I found in my reporting, and what both its staunchest defenders and its fiercest critics have to agree on, is that the death penalty simply isn't working. The nearly 9,000 people who have sat on death row since 1973 for an average of 20 years are a testament to a system in gridlock. In this book, I shine a light on the system in hopes that by doing so, it might provoke readers and their elected officials to action. Whether that action is to fix the system, hasten executions, or abolish them altogether isn't for me to decide. To tell the story of the modern death penalty, I'll tell Dozier's and how a mostly idyllic childhood in the American West led him to a cell in Ely, Nevada. Along the way, we'll meet the friends, family members, lawyers, judges, and fellow inmates who populate his story, and those like his. We'll see the winding, often illegal path that execution drugs take, from their manufacturers to states to inmates' bodies. We'll see the death penalty activists struggling to pull the brakes on a practice they see as barbaric, as well as the modern forebearers of today's lethal injection, who attempted to offer a more humane alternative to the gallows and firing squads of old. We'll meet death row inmates just before their executions and hear their final words, and we'll get into the minds of the highest prison officials in Nevada through internal emails, text messages, and documents, revealing intimately the series of events that informed Dozier's specific fate. In the end, however, this story belongs to Scott Dozier, a man who volunteered to die by lethal injection rather than endure the grim reality of death row. Dozier wouldn't get his wish, neither would the state of Nevada. I suspect that on this journey, readers, regardless of their feelings on the death penalty, will find themselves wondering, much as I have, how could this still be the way our government kills its citizens? There's a picture of Dozier, if you can see.
And then you got about 280 pages to learn all that stuff she just laid out.
Yeah.
The thing that struck me in watching several guys die at San Quentin, most of them were really bad people, did horrible crimes that boggle the mind. I think what a lot of people want to know is why in the hell you seem like a very nice young woman. Why the hell do you want to do ISIS? You know, because we're both kind of intensity reporters in the things that we chose. Why do this?
So you mentioned the victims. I just want to say at the very beginning, I sympathize so deeply with victims' families. And in all of this reporting, I think about them and I think about how my positions would change or reporting would change if I were in their shoes. I think it's so important not to forget them. I'm interested in this reporting. I think I'm genuinely interested in talking to, these people who have committed, unthinkable violence. A big part of the reason, though, is, I think a lot of times in our country, we sort of, you see sort of like local media, this sort of monster described, and it's like throw him in the cell, lock the door, throw away the key. Mm-hmm. And I get it. But there's also an amazing opportunity there. which is that you have a mass shooter. Talk to him. Figure out what happened when his story began, which is not when the crime was committed, right? Figure out what happened in childhood. Paint a picture of what led that person to commit that crime and land in that jail cell. Because I think until we understand these people, we won't understand why they did what they did, and we won't be able to prevent it.
Yeah, and in exploring who the person is, what do you hope? Do you hope to change policy by talking about? I mean, I know you say in here, but a book like this is inevitably going to influence the way people approach this.
So I'm a firm believer in democracy. I don't even know that I necessarily agree with the moratoriums on the death penalty. I think voters or legislators should really be voting about, whether or not to keep this practice in their states. With this book in particular, I'm not advocating for, everybody to abolish the death penalty. I'm not advocating for any one side. I am just hoping that voters and politicians actually face what's happening with this practice, because I think a lot of us go to sleep at night thinking like, all right, these guys are dying a peaceful death on the gurney, and whatever, or people are on death row, okay, they're getting executed, but they're not getting executed. This is a system that to me it's a political charade. You have politicians or prosecutors, district attorneys who are racking up these death sentences for political gain, and then you have a state that is not either can't get the drugs, so is not willing to re-legalize a method like the firing squad because it's too brutal or it wouldn't win them favor with the public. And to me, if you're going to have this practice, have it. It's not fair to the victims' families, if you just sort of whitewash it, right? And you don't ever carry out these executions. Not to mention taxpayers are paying hundreds of thousands, if not millions of more dollars per death sentence, which are effectively life without parole sentences if folks aren't getting executed.
A lot of that is the legal
it's illegal
appeals
fees, illegal appeals,
through.
yeah.
Plus, you need to show what that is like so people know what we're doing. The ones I watched die outside the gates and inside the death chamber, there were people cheering. The TV cameras that go on and people, crack open beers and say, yay.
Crazy, yeah.
Why is that an element of American society? That people can actually cheer when someone is being killed, whether they're a monster or not.
There is, I think, something really sick with our country. I think crime and punishment is deeply woven into the culture in our country. I was in Huntsville, Texas, where the death chamber is located. And we were just sort of walking around the town, and we came across a burger place. And we walked in and looked at the, you guys can all come in closer. You guys should kind of like fill in this space and feel free. And I looked at the menu that was up on the wall, and it was all execution themed. So you could get the like Noose burger, or you could get the Old Sparky burger, which is named after their electric chair. And I sort of looked around the restaurant, and parents are, funneling fries into their kids' mouths and just kind of going up. People are laughing, whatever, and it's this sort of celebration of what is state-sanctioned murder, and so I don't know what that's about, but look at the podcast top 10 charts. It's always 7 out of 10. It's crime. Look at the highest rated shows on Netflix, right? They're all crime shows. We have this obsession with it.
Yeah, people forget their actual victims, and those killers were all. I like how you kind of say what I say in mine about homeless people. They were all innocent children at one point.
Yeah.
And things go wrong. Mm-hmm. What was it like for you getting to know Dozier throughout that process? Because I know you tried to maintain your objectivity, but also a connectiveness with him, so you could really tell the story. Yeah. And the people around him. What kind of toll did that take on you, and how did you do it?
So when I originally reached out to him, I was frankly looking for someone a lot more sympathetic than him. He didn't really have an excuse. He grew up with a lot of privilege, and he ended up in this place. But before I describe what his personality was like, I just want to say I don't subscribe to this sort of like glorifying of killers thing. But I think it's important to note that he genuinely was really sharp. He was really funny, and it's part of the reason I kept talking to him. If I, upon reflection, because dozens of these death row inmates have called me, and I keep it up for a certain period of time. But with Dozier, part of it was that his story kept changing, and so there was really something newsworthy to follow. But he was, a guy who also wasn't a clear sociopath and wasn't pleading his innocence. He wasn't asking for pity. And so he was unusual in a lot of ways. And then, of course, he was volunteering for execution. But as his story progressed, we were talking a lot, probably 3 times a week for 14, 15 months. I think it was when I started to see the way the state, what I believed really was torturing him. They were putting him in solitary confinement. They said they had investigations going on, which there's documentation for it. I won't go into the weeds on it, but I felt like it was retaliation for him speaking out against them, because it was around the time that our interview was getting 10 million views, and that was very embarrassing for the state. And so at that point, I genuinely started to feel compassion for this person who I was seeing being, mistreated. And there were times where I called my brother and talked to Kyle, and I said, I'm really uncomfortable with this because I'm supposed to be neutral and objective. And, there's these sort of unwritten rules of journalism. You're supposed to be a robot. And I really was feeling, sympathy for him. And I really was feeling compassion. I thought it was so wrong that he was going through this. And through those conversations, I think where we landed was that, my kind of priorities are that I'm, a human first and a journalist second. And I hope that makes me a better journalist, because I hope that means that I'm really listening to the person and really feeling, feeling for them, despite whatever violence they may have committed.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You have to be human first and then a journalist. It informs your journalism.
It does, yeah.
I was going to read just a little bit
of
one of my passages that I thought was pretty elucidating. It's about the murderers.
You just love those murders.
Too many of them. You get sucked into their world, and the thing is, it is never infotainment. Yeah. That's the thing, and I like your approach, because they're real people involved in this thing on both sides. The people who did the killing and the people who were the subject of it. But on page 87, turn to your pages, class. This is how because I thought it was very good that you did describe, you're not choosing sides in this. They describe what happened. On April 25th, Detective Sherwood, who investigated Dozier for years in the narcotics unit and is now working for homicide, is called to the Copper Sands apartment complex, where a maintenance person has found a suitcase in a dumpster containing a dismembered body with no head, hands, or feet. When Sherwood arrives, he examines the evidence and realizes he needs to identify the victim. So he releases photos of the victim's tattoos to the media. A private investigator hired by Miller's family, Miller was the victim, identifies the body, and Sherwood's homicide investigation takes off. Forensic experts and senior crime scene investigators meticulously search for any trace of blood in the La Concha motel rooms and bathrooms. They turn up no blood and no DNA evidence. Dozier, meanwhile, is on the run. He goes to his girlfriend Debbie Leader's house in Phoenix. They turn on the news, and Dozier sees himself in security camera footage at the Las Vegas airport. The reporter says authorities are now asking the public to help them locate the last man seen with the victim, Scott Dozier. Leader says Dozier freaked out. He starts pacing back and forth in the house, looking out of the windows and turning off the lights. He is scared. He is paranoid. He thinks people are watching him, coming for him. Leader and Dozier decide to move into her mother's condo, but Dozier can't stay in one place too long. He leaves and doesn't tell them where he's going. Now this also illustrates the depth of reporting you did. You reconstructed. You weren't there when he was pacing, but you got the various perspectives to be able to tell that.
The court documents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And now knowing what he did, he hacked a guy up, stuffed him in a suitcase.
He was convicted of that.
He was convicted of that. And knowing that, how do you talk to him? And then how do you talk? You contacted the mothers of the victims.
Yeah.
How did you marry that together so that you didn't feel like you were being too sympathetic on either side, but you were honoring the humanity there?
It's a good question. I several times throughout that year, more than a year, I kept having these moments where I'd say, oh my God, I completely forgotten what he was convicted of. And so I'd ask him, I'd say, look, did you do it? Did you kill Jason Green? Did you kill Jeremiah Miller? And with Jeremiah Miller, which was the case in Nevada, he would give me this long-winded answer about, look, when you subscribe to the rules of the underworld, then you sign up for whatever may be coming to you, and on, right? All his philosophies on this, without saying, yes, I did it.
Because he was in the underworld. He sold drugs.
Yeah, he sold drugs. Yeah. He made meth. Anyway, and I said, did you kill Jason Green? And he said, no, I did not kill Jason Green. Mm-hmm. And that's how he answered it every time. And so I felt like he did play a part in Miller's murder. I don't know what exactly, if he actually did it or worked or gave the Russian mob the thumbs up to do it. That's a long story that's in there. But I didn't feel like he did the Jason Green one. With the mothers, sorry, I will say one more thing. There was no DNA evidence in either case, and it was all circumstantial evidence from other meth addicts. Anyway.
And that's an important distinction that you make. You don't just land on it like a brick saying he killed him.
Yeah.
It's convicted of killing. And it's important to be really precise when you're talking about these things.
When I called the moms, I only reached one of them. The other one, I feel pretty certain that she just didn't want to talk, which I understand. So I got her words from the court documents. The one that I did talk to said that she just didn't want him to do it to anybody else. So she said, I don't even really agree necessarily with the capital sentence. I just don't want him to be able to do this to anyone else's son, which is, I just thought was the most, I just thought was the most amazing response. She somehow had gotten past the, sort of vindictive. She's a very religious woman, and she got past all the sort of hatred and vindictive feelings, and just said, we just want to move forward.
I found a lot of times if you follow up with the people after the killer has died or the convicted killer's died, they don't really feel that sense of closure. Did you find that?
You mean after executions?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they don't. And you ask wardens, hey, did the family find their closure, after this happened? And they, even when they're pro-death penalty, they always say the families don't get closure from these executions, which surprised me the first time I learned it. And so I continued to ask wardens as I would meet them, and I usually got the same response.
Yeah, loved one's still dead.
Yeah.
Didn't bring them back.
Yeah. And then in some cases, the victim's family, they have the trauma of having seen the execution, which there's nothing normal about that, and those images stick with you too.
No, most people, that's the first time they ever see anyone die.
Yeah.
And hopefully the last.
Mm-hmm.
Why this is your first book? Why didn't you do ISIS?
I never intended to write a book. I really didn't. I think I was making this documentary, and then it aired, and then his story just got crazier. And so my brother Michael, would, like, in his very, as most of you know, like, stubborn, firm voice, be like, record the phone calls. I'm like, Michael, the documentary already aired. He's like, I don't care. Record the phone calls. And truthfully, that's why I had all of these conversations with Dozier. And it was specifically the phone calls when he, without giving away the ending, he starts to tell me the story of what has happened to him in solitary confinement and his fate. And those recordings ended up being, the last few chapters of this book, and really explain how he met his fate. And so because I had all those recordings, and after he died, I just also couldn't shed his memory or his story. And so, that's why this became a book.
Yeah. Have you thought about writing about the other intensive things that you've done?
Yes, I really want to write another book. I don't know what it's going to be, but I would really like to.
How long did it take you to actually do this one?
So I would say the reporting took about a year, but most of the reason it took a year is because I felt that the state was really trying to bleed me out to my deadline. And I could have written a book without their side of it, but it wouldn't have been as good. And I really wanted to know what they were texting about. I wanted the medical records. I wanted the contemporaneous notes from solitary confinement. I wanted all that stuff. And the last few chapters, it is all that. And it makes it just you really get a play-by-play of what happened to him in those four walls. And it's even having been to a lot of prisons and having reported from a lot of prisons and seen a lot of prison cells, I was blown away by the picture that all these documents painted. And so, that was a big part of it too.
Yeah, I found that I felt like, I don't know how many of you read it, but I felt like I really got to know him as well as you could get to know him, without feeling like you were pandering, you were coddling, you were condemning, and to me that's the perfect job. of what we have to do as reporters. It was well done. And I think what a lot of people ask is, how do you self-care after you grip with this stuff? Because not everyone wants to see these things. I mean, you and I go look at these things, these terrible subjects, but they're for a lot of people that's very disturbing to talk to. I don't know how many people did you talk to before they died. It was quite a number of them. And what do you do in your head to make sure that you go home to him and you feel okay?
I think taking time away from it is the main thing. And, I have colleagues who have pretty severe PTSD because they didn't treat it for 20 years. And they did a lot more intensive reporting than I've done. And we've had a lot of conversations about it. And it's stepping away from the reporting that is the only thing that I think allows kind of those, disturbing thoughts and symptoms and things to ease. I don't know if you feel that way. But I need to take a break from it. And then family, kids are they're the light in the darkness. They really are.
Oh yeah, your whole DNA changes when the kids come, huh?
Yeah,
I found that helped me too. Another thing for you to read, if you wouldn't mind reading, page 215. A little bit of a window into what you were doing here. Start with, how do you feel?
So is this when we're in the prison?
I believe
so. Yeah. So this is when I finally got into the prison to talk to Dozier in person. Some of you may have seen the Vice episode on this. How do you feel about the state using fentanyl to kill you? I think it's awesome, he says. My suggestion was they just use fentanyl, just use a single drug. I mean, it's killing people all over the place. You guys get pharmaceutical grade fentanyl and just bang me up, man. Use a shit ton. I've gotten to know you as a seemingly normal, kind, smart, funny person. How do I reconcile that with what you were convicted of? People are complex, he says earnestly. Maybe people are just complex, or maybe I didn't do it. He offers a hint of a smile. Do you think you're a sociopath? I don't. No, I'm way too empathetic, he says. No, I cry. I'm a weepy bastard, man. Stuff gets me all the time. They certainly don't like empathy, you know what I mean? He lets out a laugh every few minutes, bringing levity to an otherwise dark conversation. I tried to get them to let me wear a Time's Up shirt, Dozier says, referencing part of the Me Too movement that he wanted to co-opt for his exit. You have such dark humor about it. You're going to be killed in 2 days and you're cracking jokes about it. I think people watching this will be like, oh yeah, he's nuts. But see, this is my life, you know what I mean? If I didn't add some levity to it, this without humor is just even worse. Hey, without humor, it's worthless, man. And this is my life. It's not like I haven't been preparing for this for 10 fucking years. You know what I'm saying? If your execution is prolonged or botched in any way, what do you want people to know? Sucks to be me. He laughs. I can't help but smile. What's the hardest part? The one that's really got to me, really had an emotional effect, was realizing that I'm not going to see my grandkids. His whole demeanor changes and his eyes well up. I'm not going to see Angie's girls. Dozier had been a central figure in the lives of his ex-wife's daughters, who were now teenagers. We're a kid-oriented family. He starts to choke up. I'm good with kids, man. Infinitely patient. I like them. What do you hope for your son? What do you hope for your grandkids? What do you hope for Angie's kids? That they're more successful in finding happiness and some degree of satisfaction and gratification in our life within the parameters. You know what I'm saying? He says, my inability to do that certainly is a sizable portion for me being here, and I just hope they're able to do that. What do the next 48 hours look like? Go back and finish cleaning out the cell and then get up early and strip down in the state clothes and then nonstop observation until they kill me. Not a stellar time. You have visits tomorrow, though? I do, yeah. It'll probably be terrible. I can't imagine it's going to be anything but a shit's fucking storm. I mean, holy, I'm not looking forward to that. And with that, we wrap up, break down the gear, and Santina tells us it's time to leave. I feel the finality of this moment, but in true Irish Catholic fashion, I stretch the goodbye. Maybe out of discomfort, maybe because I know it's the last time I'm likely to see Dozier. He tells me he'll call me before the execution. It's what I need to hear before turning my back on a dead man walking.
And in that passage, I noticed one thing that we talked about. A lot of the people in the book you refer to by their first names. He's always Dozier. You kept that little bit of distance there, but you also you were moved by what you saw in him. Did that make you feel bad in the end that you actually cared for a guy who was convicted of chopping someone up?
I think it's taken time to sort of reconcile that internal conflict, but I don't regret it. You know, I think we're all human, and look, as I said in the beginning, I think we can learn from folks, and I think that he actually wasn't a terrible guy. I think he did some terrible things. I think he did way too much meth, and there could have been some other things going on, brain trauma and so on. But I don't think he was a bad guy. I think he did some really bad stuff.
We talked a little bit when we were coming to this. Luigi Mangione, the guy who's suspected of killing the United Healthcare executive. What do you make of that? There are two kinds of thoughts about that in the country. There were people who were sending him money, holding rallies for him, and then people who say, well, President Trump wants to put him to death.
So what you all may know or not, but the reason this is related to the conversation is because the Attorney General Pam Bondi has just said she's going to seek the federal death penalty for Luigi Mangione. Trump is very committed to filling up the federal death row. There are only 3 people there now, 2 mass shooters and the Boston bomber, and then clearing death row with executions. And so it's a huge news story right now. Look, you can't kill people. Our healthcare system is so messed up, and I've experienced some of that firsthand. And I think actually our healthcare system is violent too. I think it does cause people to die, earlier deaths than they needed. And I think there's a long conversation about that we could have, but you can't kill people. You can't kill people on the street, in broad daylight in New York.
What other countries kill people like us?
China, Saudi, Egypt, Iran. We're in good company.
Yeah. Yeah. Why did Europe and the other westernized countries
Russia
stop
ended it in 1999.
Yeah.
Because they're more civilized than we are. I mean, really, it's when you look at the countries that actually still do it, it's the countries that we continue to call the worst, most abusive human rights violators in the world, and yet we're right there with them. And in the late 90s when Russia did it, we were continuing to say we're the global leader when it comes to human rights. And at that time, we were sentencing more and more people to death, and we were executing more and more people. I mean, literally the chart goes like this. And so I think that there's this thing that we have to reconcile in our country. Are we the gold standard that we purport to be?
We have terrible health care compared to others. We have more guns than anyone, more violence, early death.
Yeah.
All of that do you see a way of turning that around? Because Newsom, who we both talked to, and you talked to extensively about this, wants to turn San Quentin into a rehabilitation center. Do you think that has a intelligence to it?
So my response here is not to sympathize with violent offenders. It's to make the point that, and Newsom says it best. He says, "I'm not weak on crime, and I'm not tough on crime. I'm smart on crime." And I've been to San Quentin a couple times and seen these programs and met these guys. And they're actually, I was going to say that somebody might be here who was in one of these programs for 30, or not 30 years, but he was at San Quentin for 30 years. And they work. They just do. They work. And the reason that we know they work is because the data is very clear. So
recidivism.
Yes.
You roll that out. Because it's the same thing with homelessness. You invest and it saves money. Tell us about that.
It's all about public safety. It's not about, yes, he wants to be humane to violent offenders, but it's not about that. It's about public safety. The national recidivism rate, which is the rate of reoffense, is around 42%. So 42%, right, of people reoffend when they get out. It's like atrocious, right? We are not rehabilitating anyone. When they start to do these programs, and you can see if they're doing educational or vocational or therapy, trauma-based therapy, the recidivism rate goes down, and it goes down a lot.
You had a wonderful statistic in there. I think it was in near single digits. Isn't that right?
Yes. I mean, for some of these programs, the recidivism rate has dropped to 0. Now, more likely it's in the 20s, but it's mostly, and when you talk to the guys and you say, like, what is it about these programs? You know, when the media talks about sort of like the coding and you know, some of these flashier programs, the radio program, but I don't really believe it's that. I think it's the trauma-based therapy. I think it's these programs turning rage into power, teaching these guys why they were feeling that anger, why they were feeling that rage when they did it. And I always ask them, if you had gotten these programs when you were a teenager or a preteen, before you started getting into gangs and stuff, would you have ended up at San Quentin? And all of them were like, no way. I just didn't understand what was going on in my head. You know, I didn't have a parent. I was kicked out of my house at 10. I was being hit in the head by my stepfather for the 5 years before that. It's they didn't understand what was going on inside their bodies. And so they felt if those educational programs had been available when they were younger, they wouldn't have committed the crimes.
And if you fix that, you save money on the incarceration costs, on the law enforcement, on chasing them out with police. Yeah.
And communities are safer. Yeah.
I think we're to the Q&A portion of this thing now.
Okay.
So who has questions? All clamor.
I have a question. So, Dozier was prepared to die. And what was his philosophy about where he was going to go, what was going to happen? Did he have any thoughts about that?
I wish that he could be here to say it himself, because it would go something like this. I don't give a shit. I'm not going anywhere. Like, I'm done. Don't bury me, burn me. I don't care. Don't even do a funeral. His family did do a funeral, but he didn't. He was reflective about a lot of things, and he was really into philosophy, but that was one where he just said, it's over. Yeah.
One thing I like is that you use the actual language. That's our editors. Our editors are always telling us, you know, it's F dash dash dash. No, it's fine. It's real. And so you're not getting a varnished version of this thing.
Yeah.
I like that.
Alex.
Is there a country, I suspect it's Nordic, if there is, that is the model for rehabilitation?
Yeah, it is Norway.
It's what?
It's Norway, and so they.
I don't know that word for business.
Oh, it's okay. So they started it in the 90s, and God, I had all these stats in my head and they're in the book. So it's going to take you about a day and a half to get there in the book, but you will get there. But it dropped drastically. And that's what Newsom is basing his program on. And interestingly, North Dakota is doing it, Washington, Oregon. Yeah, and the recidivism rate just tells the story. And these are, by the way, we're not talking about like people selling weed. This is like violent offenders who have life sentences, who have killed people. And that's the recidivism rate. That drop applies to them.
And as part of that program, Governor Newsom dismantled death row at San Quentin and farmed those prisoners off to other facilities. Yeah, which is pretty ballsy. Yeah, how many years old is that thing? 1800s. It goes back to. It's a radical change that not a whole lot of people pay attention to. Yeah, but she does. Yeah.
Yes.
How did
Dozier get involved in the underworld?
So he's got a really interesting early life. He did all kinds of things. I mean, he was a stuntman in live Vegas shows. He went through the U.S. Army Ranger program. Jumped out of aircraft.
Thing, right?
Yeah,
that's
chariot.
Pretty cool.
So he raced chariots in arenas in Vegas. So it's just like a movie, really, kind of when you're reading some of these chapters. But he had this kind of issue from the time he was a child, which is that he just needed a high level of stimulation. He just needed to be feeling adrenaline all the time. And even jumping out of aircraft in the Rangers, like, it was not enough for him. And so he moved back to Las Vegas, and he was doing those live shows, but eventually started dealing meth and then started making it, and became very kind of famous in that underworld in the 90s. And then he started using. And he started using more and more and more. And the people that were closest to him at that time say that at some point he just completely changed as a person. Yeah.
There was an important point you made in there. What message did he have for the victim families?
The idea was if they feel that I am their monster, and they feel like they're going to get closure by my execution, I want that for them. And his language was very careful, because he was not admitting guilt, but he said, I really sympathize with them, and I sympathize with the fact that they lost their children.
Yeah, not every condemned man comes to that kind of conclusion.
John, I got a question. Did you get access to his psych eval? And, you know, because you made very clear that he was not a sociopath. I'm just kind of curious, what was the profile?
So in one of his earlier trials, there was a psychologist who diagnosed him with narcissistic personality disorder. And he felt that that was done as a sort of favor to his lawyer for him to have a mitigating factor. He didn't believe he had it, and that was part of, in the excerpt when he's saying, you know, I'm a weepy bastard, I feel empathy for, he didn't feel that he had that. Later on, when he was in solitary confinement in the months before he died, I went through all of the medical records from that time, and there was nothing in there in terms of any kind of mental illness. And he was very straightforward about that. He said, I do not have a mental illness. I don't want anyone pitying me for having hallucinated. He's like, I'm totally clear-headed. But in those medical records, which you'll see in the book, you can see how his mental health really degrades when he's in solitary. And it happens very quickly. And you can hear it, you know, in his phone calls. You can see it in his contemporaneous notes. He's a very precise communicator, very clear-headed, and he started to get confused about things and would start referencing things from 20 years before, and it started messing with him. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, super interesting. I'm thinking, you know, listening to what you're talking about, like the next season of David Fincher's White House. In some ways. But talk to us about the journey of both writing the book, the interviewing, and how did all of this change you?
So a lot of the reporting with Dozier was in, you know, the last year of his life, and that's when I was talking to him a lot, and when I visited him on death row, and then when he died. But a lot of the reporting for the book happened 5 years after all that, and the reason is because, you know, he died, and my assignment had been done for 8 months, and I went to his funeral and met with his family and everything. But then, you know, there was this whole gap in my knowledge of his story, which was everything from the state side. And so that was the second sort of chunk of reporting. It was that, and then the reporting on the larger story of the death penalty. I alternate chapters between Dozier's story and the broader story. And, you know, I say this in the final few pages, but I think it's, you know, meeting Dozier, and that being during a time when I was meeting a lot of other death row inmates, it reminded me that, or taught me that, you know, for folks who are on the fringes of society, whether it be a death row inmate or, you know, someone who's homeless here, you know, who's addicted to hard drugs, who may appear violent and erratic when you're walking down the street, you know, which all of us, I'm sure, have experienced at some point. You know, these people have a story, and you know, it's okay to look people in the eye, you know, and it's okay to feel compassion for people who have been shunned from everywhere else. So I would say that that's my biggest takeaway, and it's a challenge. It's a challenge because some of the guys I meet in this book, I mean, I talk about how I'm really emotional when I read about their crimes, you know, horrific stuff that I won't even say out loud tonight. And so I find that to be still a challenge.
One more question, I'm told.
Do you think Dozier, if he hadn't been involved with meth and the Russian gangs and that sort of thing, had the potential to murder anyone?
Good question.
The potential to murder anyone.
Had it not been for that. Had he not taken drugs or been involved with the Russian mob or whatever?
That's a great question. I don't know. I really don't know. But when I was visiting his parents on their ranch in Colorado, they now have left every city they've lived in, and they live in a very remote life. I asked his dad if he thought that he could have lived a life outside of prison, fully expecting for his dad to say, oh yeah, he's such a smart guy. His dad, I mean, his both of his siblings are, you know, chemical engineer and one of like a lead banker at, you know, making 7 digits a year. I thought his dad was going to be like, yes, he would have gotten sober and he would have gotten through it and whatever. And his dad was just like, nope. I don't think he could have lived a law-abiding life. It just wasn't in him. So I don't know the answer to that. There were many times in our conversations where I thought, I think he could probably do it. But his own dad did not. And they had a great relationship.
Well, I have to say, this is a wonderfully empathetic and clear-eyed, and very complete book that reads quickly. So it's not like you have to struggle through because it's academic.
I tried to. My goal was, of course, to make it educational, but I really tried to make it a page turner. I did not want it to bore you, so
Yeah.
I hope it doesn't.
Goal number one as journalist. I'd say that you succeeded wonderfully.
Cool. Thank
So,
you.
Can we give one more hand for Gianna Toboni?